4 hours before anyone learned her name, a gate agent held her boarding pass up to the light and asked loud enough for 30 people to hear whether the ticket had actually been issued to her. 4 hours later, a Navy commander 200 miles out over open water heard a woman's voice come across the emergency frequency, flat, unhurried, saying that a wide-body airliner with 280 souls aboard was on fire and was not going to reach land, and he stopped breathing. Because he knew that voice. And the last time he'd heard it, it was counting bodies. If you're here, do me one favor before we start. Subscribe and stay with this story all the way to the end, because the part everyone remembers isn't the crash. Then drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The transmission came in on 121.5, the guard frequency, the channel. Everything in the sky is required to monitor, and almost nothing ever uses. When it opens, it means somebody has run out of better options. Commander Elias Rourke was 40 minutes into a routine coordination flight with a helicopter detachment operating off a destroyer, running workup south of the transit lanes. He had a coffee, going cold in a holder by his knee, and a checklist he'd already finished twice. He was, by his own later admission, thinking about absolutely nothing. Then the guard channel opened, and a woman's voice came through it, and every conversation on that frequency for 200 miles in every direction died at once. Any warship, any station, any aircraft on guard. Cascadia Pacific 442. We have an uncontained cargo fire aft hold. Suppression has failed. We are 640 miles from the nearest land, and we are not going to make land. 280 souls aboard, requesting immediate ditch coordination and surface support. There was no tremor in it. That was the part that made the hair stand up on the back of Rourke's neck. He had heard people declare emergencies before he had heard men with 20 years and 4,000 hours go up half an octave when the panel lit red. This voice had gone the other direction. It had gotten quieter. It had the specific flatness of somebody reading a number off a gauge, and the number was bad, and reading it out loud was simply the next task on a list. His co-pilot said something. Rourke didn't hear it, because there was something underneath the flatness, a shape to the words. A cadence he had heard in a debrief room 2 years ago from a woman sitting in a folding chair with a towel around her shoulders and salt still drying in her hair, giving an account of the worst night of her life in the exact same tone she would have used to order lunch. Rourke keyed his mic and heard himself say a word that made no sense to anyone else in his aircraft. Undertow. Nobody answered him. On the other end of that frequency, 640 miles from anywhere, the woman had already moved on to the next item. 4 hours earlier, she had been the least interesting person in a terminal full of them. Lieutenant Quinn Marlowe was 25 years old, 5'6", and built the way people are built when their body is a tool they use rather than a thing they display. Her hair was a dark honey brown, pulled back into a ponytail that had gone slightly wavy from being wet too many times in her life and dried in a hurry. She wore an olive drab t-shirt soft at the collar from about 200 washes and a pair of camouflage trousers that had stopped being uniform years ago and had become simply the pants she wore. Running shoes with the color scrubbed out of them, a canvas duffel over one shoulder that weighed 19 pounds and contained everything she currently owned that mattered. There was nothing on her that said Navy. No insignia, no patch, no unit ball cap, no ring, no bumper sticker, pride. She had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing a person could be in a crowded room was forgettable, and she had gotten so good at it that it had stopped being a skill and become a personality. People looked at her exactly once. A college kid, a hiker, somebody's daughter coming back from a camping trip. They took that reading, filed it, and never looked again. She let them. She had never once in her adult life corrected anybody's assumption about her. It cost her nothing, and it bought her the one thing she genuinely valued, which was the ability to see a room while the room was not seeing her. But she was not on vacation. In 72 hours in a windowless room at Pearl Harbor, a board of 3 officers was going to sit down and decide whether Quinn Marlowe got to stay in the United States Navy. The paperwork called it an administrative review. Everyone involved knew what it actually was. Her phone had been buzzing since she cleared security. She finally answered it, standing off to the side of the concourse with her thumb in her ear. The lawyer assigned to her, a lieutenant commander she had met exactly twice who had spent both meetings looking at his laptop, did not say hello. "Marlowe, listen to me carefully. Between now and Thursday, you do not discuss the report, the findings, the supplier, or the incident with anyone. Not a reporter, not a friend, not your mother. You don't email, you don't hint. You're under a protective order, and the board will absolutely use it if you slip. Are we clear? She looked at the floor for a second, and if somebody's life depends on it, there was a pause on the line long enough for her to hear him decide she was being difficult. Nobody's life depends on it, Lieutenant. Just get on the plane. He hung up. She stood there with the phone still against her ear for another 2 seconds, then put it in her pocket. She had been in the Navy for 6 years. She was a rescue swimmer by trade and an instructor by assignment, the person they sent to teach other people how to survive water that wanted to kill them. She had pulled 14 human beings out of the ocean in her career, and she remembered every single one of their faces, including the 4 she had pulled out of one specific fire 2 years ago, and the one she hadn't. The first thing that went wrong that morning was so small it barely qualified. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass. The reader gave the wrong tone. He scanned it again. Wrong tone again. He looked at the pass, then at her, then at the pass, and something in his face reorganized itself into an expression Quinn had seen roughly 400 times in her life and could have drawn from memory. He turned the pass over. He held it up toward the light like he was checking a $20 bill. Then he said not to her exactly, but at a volume that had a lot more to do with the 30 people in line behind her than with anything he needed to know. Ma'am, this is a paid business class fare on a partner code. Was this ticket actually issued to you? The line went quiet in the particular way lines do when they smell a scene and want to watch it without being seen watching it. A man 2 spaces back shifted his weight. A woman with a stroller looked up. Quinn felt the thing happen in her chest that had been happening her entire adult life. A small, hot, useless flare, and she did what she always did, which was set it down. It's mine, she said. You understand I have to ask. I understand you don't. She said it without heat. That was the part that seemed to bother him more than if she'd shouted. He scanned the pass a 4th time. It worked. He handed it back without looking at her, and she walked down the jetway with 30 people watching her go. And she did not adjust her shoulders or her chin or her walk by a single degree. Later, sitting in a hangar on a destroyer's flight deck with a rescue blanket, she would try to explain to an NTSB investigator why she hadn't just said, I'm a naval officer at the gate. And she would fail to explain it because the truth was too simple to sound like a reason. She had spent 2 years being told what she was allowed to say about herself. She'd gotten out of the habit of saying anything. The second thing that went wrong put her within arm's reach of the man who was going to spend the next 4 hours of his life trying to have her physically restrained. It was a routine forward cabin seat swap, a couple separated by the booking system, a gate agent solving it in 90 seconds, and it deposited Quinn in the forward galley area for exactly as long as it took to sort out. She was standing there with her duffel on one shoulder, entirely still waiting to be told where to go. The man in 2A looked up from his tablet. Nolan Ashby was 49 years old and had the specific polish of somebody who spent a great deal of money on looking like he didn't have to think about it. He was a senior vice president at a cabin interiors manufacturer. He flew this route 11 times a year. He had never once in his entire life been asked whether a ticket was actually issued to him. He looked at the olive t-shirt. He looked at the camo trousers. He looked at the canvas bag and the ponytail and the shoes. And he said to the man across the aisle in the amused half voice that men like him use when they want a stranger to hear them without being able to prove it was aimed at them. You know what I'll never understand? People who buy the costume. Whole aisle of that stuff at the surplus store. $20 and suddenly everybody's been to war. The man across the aisle laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse than that. It was the reflexive, unthinking laugh of somebody agreeing to be on the winning side of a joke he hadn't examined. Quinn Marlowe stood 4 feet away from Nolan Ashby and did not turn her head. She was thinking in that moment about a specific brand of surplus store camouflage, the cheap kind, the imported kind, and about the fact that it melts. She'd seen it. She had once cut a pair of those trousers off a 19-year-old sailor with trauma shears because the fabric had fused to his calf during a shipboard fire, and she remembered exactly what that had smelled like. And the thing she was proudest of in her entire career was that she had not thrown up until afterward. The gate agent found her seat. 31C, aisle 3/4 of the way back, one row forward of the aft galley bulkhead. She walked past Ashby without a word. He had already forgotten she existed by the time she reached row 9. Oh, she always took the aisle, never the window. The window was for people who wanted to look at things. The aisle was for people who wanted to be able to move. Quinn sat down, put her duffel under the seat in front of her. Not the overhead, never the overhead. She wanted her hands on it and did what she had done on every commercial flight she had taken since she was 20 years old, which was count. 4 exits she could reach without climbing over anyone. 11 rows to the aft doors, 7 to the overwings. 2 flight attendants working the back, one of them very young. 61 passengers within her line of sight. 2 of them would be trouble in an emergency, the large man in 33A, who had already had 2 drinks and would freeze, and the woman in 29F, traveling with 2 children, under 7, who would not freeze but would refuse to move without both of them and would therefore move slowly. She wasn't being paranoid. She wasn't even being alert, not really. This was just what her brain did with an empty room, the way some people hum. Then she looked out the window on the far side of the cabin past a sleeping man's shoulder, and everything in her went very still. The aft cargo door was open. A ground crewman was standing in it with a clipboard, and taped to the inside of the door frame at eye level was a yellow maintenance placard with a part number on it, MRL 9. Quinn Marlowe read those 4 characters and felt something cold walk all the way up her spine and sit down at the base of her skull. She knew that part number the way other people know their own phone number. She had written it 406 times. She had written it in a report that ran to 91 pages that took her 11 months, that had cost her every friend she had at her old command. And that was at that exact moment in a locked cabinet in a building in Hawaii, the reason her career was scheduled to end on Thursday. MRL 9 was a cargo compartment liner, a composite panel, the thing that lines the walls and ceiling of the hold, and is supposed to do one job, contain a fire long enough for the suppression system to smother it. The certification standard said it had to hold for a specific interval under a specific flame. Quinn had watched a sample of MRL 9 fail that test in a burn lab in Norfolk. Not fail catastrophically, and then once it burned through, keep burning because the panel didn't just let the fire out, it fed it. Halon doesn't extinguish a burning composite. Halon displaces oxygen and weights, and a composite that generates its own oxidizer doesn't care what you displace. She had put all of that in her report. Her report had been accepted and thanked and shelved. Six weeks later, a version of it appeared in a trade publication, and instead of investigating the panel, the Navy had opened an investigation into how it got out, and the name at the top of the distribution list was hers. She had not leaked it. She had spent 2 years saying so to people who had already decided. And now she was sitting in 31C on a 15-year-old wide body about to fly 2,600 miles over open ocean, looking at a yellow placard that meant that liner was still installed, still flying, still deferred, still legal. She sat there and did the things she had trained 1,000 students to do and had never once had to do to herself. She talked herself down. The placard is a routine deferral. Half the airplanes in the sky are flying with deferred items, and the odds of a cargo fire in any given flight are effectively 0. You are 72 hours from a board that will end you. You are exhausted and your brain is looking for something to be afraid of. That isn't Thursday. It worked. Mostly. Her heart rate came down. She did not open her book. The watch on her left wrist was a dive watch steel, unfashionably large on her arm, with a crack running diagonally across the crystal like a fault line. It didn't run. The hands had been stopped at 417 for 2 years. It hadn't been hers. Senior Chief Rosalind Ibarra had been 38 years old and 4 months from her 20. She was 5'2" and had a laugh you could hear through a bulkhead, and she had run the water survival schoolhouse, the way a good chief runs anything, which is to say she made it look effortless and never once let anyone see what it cost. She had taught Quinn everything. She had also on 3 separate occasions told her to shut up and had been right all 3 times. 2 years ago off Point Lumauma, a training vessel had caught fire in the dark. There had been 11 people aboard. Quinn had been in the water within 90 seconds. She had gotten 4 out. She remembered all 4, their weight, their grip, the specific way panic changes. What a human body does to you when you try to hold it, and she had gone back for the fifth. The fifth was a life raft, a 20-person raft that 6 people were clinging to the outside of because it had not inflated. The inflation assembly had fired, and the raft had come out of its canister, and it had done nothing at all. She had gone under to free it manually. Roz had gone under with her. Quinn came up. Roz didn't. They found her at dawn. When they brought her aboard, the watch was still on her wrist, cracked, stopped, and Quinn had taken it off a dead woman's arm in front of 6 witnesses and put it on her own. And nobody in that boat had said a single word about it. 5 people died that night, 2 from the fire, 3 in the water waiting for a raft that never inflated. The Navy's initial finding was that the raft assembly had been improperly stowed. Quinn had read that finding, gone very quiet for about 6 days, and then requested access to the maintenance records. 11 months later, she handed in 91 pages that said the raft assemblies came from a batch with a known defect. The batch had been certified destroyed and had not been destroyed. The same supplier group produced the MRL-9 cargo liner, and the same signature had approved the deferral on both. She had named the signature. Everything that had happened to her since had happened because she named the signature. The airplane pushed back. The safety briefing played. Quinn watched it. She always watched it all the way through because Roz had once told her that the day you stop watching the brief is the day you've decided you're special, and nobody who's decided they're special has ever survived anything. The young flight attendant working her aisle was named Inés Duarte, 22 years old, so knew that her lanyard still had the plastic sheen on it. She stopped at 31C on the first pass. "Anything to drink, ma'am?" "Water, thank you." Inés gave her a smile that was 90% training and 10% genuine terror at being watched and moved on. Quinn drank half the water and kept the cup. 3 hours went by. Nothing happened. Nothing was supposed to happen. She dozed for about 40 minutes and dreamed nothing at all, which was a mercy she did not take for granted. At 81 minutes past the midpoint, the cabin was as quiet as a cabin gets. Screens on, shades down, 268 people in the middle of the long, dull center of a Pacific crossing, doing what human beings do at cruise altitude, which is voluntarily forget where they are. At 94 minutes, Quinn Marlowe's head came up off the seatback. Son, it wasn't smoke. That was the first thing her brain reported, and it reported it with a kind of urgency that she recognized and did not like. It wasn't the burnt dust smell of a heating element. It wasn't the ozone snap of electrical. It wasn't galley, no coffee, no oven, nothing organic. It was sweet. Sweet and sharp underneath with something chemical at the back of it, faintly like nail polish remover and faintly like caramelizing sugar. And the two of them together made a combination that had no business existing at 37,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. Quinn had smelled that exact combination one time in her life. In a burn lab in Norfolk, Virginia, standing 80 feet back from a test rig, holding a sample coupon in a gloved hand, watching an MRL-9 panel come apart under flame, and thinking that's not right, that's not how that's supposed to look. Why is it still burning after the flame's off? She sat completely still for 4 full seconds and ran every other explanation she could construct. Somebody's perfume. No wrong direction, wrong persistence, and it was getting stronger, not weaker. Something spilled in the galley. No, the galley was forward of her, and the air was moving aft. Dicing residue, cargo hold cosmetics, a leaking bottle in someone's bag, a leaking bottle in someone's bag. She wanted that one to be true so badly that she gave it a full extra second. Then she looked at the ceiling panel above the aft galley, 11 feet behind her, and watched a thin gray thread of something come out of the seam where 2 panels met, not a plume, not a billow, just a thread, thin as a pencil line curling once and disappearing into the air conditioning flow. Nobody else saw it. Nobody was looking up. 267 other people on that airplane were looking at screens. Quinn looked at the overhead attendant call panel. No light. She looked toward the forward bulkhead where the cabin annunciator would show a cargo smoke warning. Nothing. No tone, no light, no alarm. And that, more than the smell, more than the thread of gray, was the moment the floor went out from under Quinn Marlowe, because she knew why there was no alarm. The aft cargo smoke detection loop was on the same deferred maintenance bulletin as the liner. She had written that sentence herself. She had written it on page 63. She had underlined it. She had put it in the executive summary because she'd been told nobody reads past the summary. The deferral authorizes continued operation with a degraded detection loop in a compartment lined with a panel that does not meet burn-through certification. She'd argued about that sentence with her own legal advisor for 2 hours because he thought it was too strong. It wasn't strong enough. There were 280 people on this airplane. There was a fire in the hold underneath them, and the machine whose entire job was to tell somebody about it had been legally, formally in writing, permitted not to work. Quinn's hands were flat on her thighs. Her heart rate was 104 and climbing, and she pulled it back down by breathing out for 6 seconds because she had taught 400 students to do exactly that. And it had always felt slightly ridiculous when she said it out loud, and it was not ridiculous now. She checked her watch out of pure reflex, the cracked one, the stopped one, and saw 4:17, the way she saw it 40 times a day, the way she'd seen it every day for 2 years. You count everybody before you go in, 280, and you count everybody when you come out. She thought about the protective order. She thought about the lieutenant commander's voice on the phone that morning. Nobody's life depends on it. She thought about the board convening in 72 hours and about what it would do to her to walk in there, having violated the one condition they had placed on her. The calculation took her less than a second, and it wasn't really a calculation because there wasn't anything on the other side of the scale. Quinn Marlowe unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up in the aisle of row 31 in an olive drab t-shirt and a pair of camo trousers, with her ponytail coming loose at the temple and a dead woman's broken watch on her wrist, and she was to every single person on that airplane, absolutely nobody. Inez Duarte was 5 rows back with a cart. Quinn walked to her, and when she spoke, her voice was so level and so quiet that Inez had to lean in to hear it, and would later say that this was the exact thing that made her believe it. Don't call it in on the interphone. Don't say the word out loud. Walk with me to the aft galley right now and tell me who your senior cabin crew member is. Inez looked at her, at the t-shirt, the ponytail, the 25-year-old face, and did the arithmetic that every single person on that flight had already done and gotten wrong. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to take your seat. We'll be starting service in... Inez. Quinn had read the name tag once 4 hours ago and had not thought about it since, and it came out of her mouth now like she'd known her for years. There is a fire in the aft hold. It started somewhere between 9 and 14 minutes ago. Your detection loop is deferred, which is why nothing has told you about it. In about 6 minutes, it's going to get through the ceiling liner into this cabin, and after that, you're going to have between 4 and 11 minutes to do everything you are ever going to do. The cart stopped moving. Inez Duarte's face did something Quinn had seen on 19-year-old sailors and on drowning men, and on exactly one senior chief in the water off Point Loma, which is the face a person makes in the half-second before they decide whether to believe you. Who are you? And Quinn Marlowe, who had let a gate agent hold her boarding pass up to the light, who had stood 4 feet from a man calling her a fraud and hadn't turned her head, who had spent 2 years under an order not to say her own name in connection with the only thing she had ever done that mattered, took a breath. I'm the person who wrote the report on that liner, she said, and I'm going to need the flight deck. Inez Duarte did not move for 2 full seconds, and in those 2 seconds, she made a decision that would follow her for the rest of her life. She didn't believe the woman. That was the honest truth of it, and she would say so later under oath without flinching. She did not believe a 25-year-old in a surplus store t-shirt had written a federal report on anything. What she believed was the smell, because now that somebody had put words around it, she could smell it too, and she had never smelled anything like it in 14 months of flying, and there was no drink, cart, no lavatory, chemical, no perfume in the world that smelled like burnt sugar and paint thinner having a fight. Stay here, Inez said, and abandoned her cart in the middle of the aisle, which was a thing she had been specifically trained never to do. Simone Adeyemi was in the forward galley with a manifest in her hand. She was 34 years old, 11 years on the line, and she had the particular calm of a woman who had already handled a birth, 2 deaths, a heart attack over Greenland, and 1 gentleman who had tried to open a door at cruise altitude. When Inez came through the curtain, moving too fast, Simone put the manifest down without being asked. Talk. Row 31, passenger says there's a fire in the aft hold. Says the detection loop is deferred, says we've got 6 minutes before it comes through the ceiling. Simone's eyes went to the annunciator panel. Clean, green, nothing. What does she look like? Like a kid, Inez said. Like somebody's little sister. And Simone Adeyemi did the thing that she would be praised for at one hearing and quietly criticized for at another, which was that she believed the panel over the person for 90 more seconds. She walked aft. She found Quinn Marlowe standing in the aisle at row 31 with one hand resting on a seat back and her whole body angled toward the aft bulkhead like a compass needle, and she used the voice, the one they teach you, warm and immovable, the voice that has ended 1,000 arguments about overhead bin space. Ma'am, I'm the senior cabin crew member. I understand you have a concern. I need you to sit down and let me handle it. Look at the ceiling seam above the aft galley, Quinn said. Simone looked because it cost her nothing. There was no thread of gray anymore. There was a stain, a brown discoloration the size of a dinner plate spreading out from the seam like water through a paper towel, and while she watched it, the edge of it moved. Simone Adeyemi had 11 years on the line. She had never seen a ceiling panel do that. Okay, she said, and her voice had changed. Okay, what's your name? Quinn Marlowe. Quinn, I'm going to call this in, and I'm going to need you to call it in. Tell them aft hold Class C compartment, and tell them the smoke loop is on the deferral list so they don't waste 90 seconds waiting for an alarm that isn't coming. Then tell them to discharge the bottle now and not to wait for confirmation because they won't get confirmation. Simone looked at her one more time. T-shirt, ponytail, 25. How do you know the loop's deferred? Because I read the placard on the cargo door in San Diego, Quinn said. And because I've been reading that same deferral for 2 years, and I know exactly what it says. The suppression bottle fired at 4 minutes and 40 seconds after Quinn stood up. For a while it worked. That was the cruelest part of the whole thing, and Quinn had known it was coming, and it still got into her chest and squeezed. The stain on the ceiling stopped spreading. The smell thinned. In the flight deck, Captain Grady Whitlock watched the cargo temperature indication level off and then start to come down, and he let out a breath, and he told his first officer they'd get it looked at in Honolulu and file the paperwork over a beer. Grady Whitlock was 58 and had 31 years and 18,000 hours and had never once had an airplane try to kill him. He was 4 months from retirement. His wife had already booked a place in Coeur d'Alene. 90 seconds of relief. Quinn counted them. Then the ceiling stain came back, and it came back darker, and it came back faster, and she felt something in the deck. Plates under her running shoes. Not a vibration exactly, more like a pressure. The sense a swimmer gets when something large has moved in the water nearby. There it is, she said to nobody. Ines was standing beside her now, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and she heard it. There, what is it stopped? It stopped right, the panel. Halon doesn't put out a composite fire. Quinn's voice was very quiet and very fast. It takes the oxygen out of the compartment and smothers what's burning. That works great on cardboard, on a lithium pack on a resin panel that's been cooking for 20 minutes. It doesn't matter what you do to the air because the panel is generating its own oxidizer as it decomposes. You can't smother something that's making its own oxygen. All the bottle did was buy us 90 seconds. Inez Duarte was 22 years old and had been awake since 4 in the morning, and she said out loud in a passenger cabin, "Oh my God, Inez." Quinn turned her head for the first time and looked directly at her. "You don't get to do that yet, not for another 2 hours. Where are your rafts?" "Our what?" "Slide rafts, doors 1 through 4. Are your overwings raft capable or slide only?" And Inez Duarte, who had been through 6 weeks of training and 1 recurrent, could not remember. She stood in the aisle of a burning airplane, and her mind went absolutely white, and she felt the shame of it like a hand round her throat. "Slide only," Simone said behind them. She had come back, and she was moving now with the speed of a woman who had entirely stopped arguing. "Doors 1 through 4 are raft capable. 25-person capacity, 4 rafts plus 2 auxiliary packs in the aft ceiling stowage. That's 112 seats for 280 people, plus the aux packs, plus everybody's in a vest." "Then everybody's in a vest," Quinn said, "and half of them are in the water holding onto a rope, and the water is 71 degrees, and that's survivable for a long time if they're calm and about 40 minutes if they're not." Simone stared at her. "You've done this." "I've taught it 400 times." "That's not the same thing." "No," Quinn said, "it isn't." At 6 minutes and 10 seconds, the smoke got into the flight deck. It didn't come through the door. It came the way it almost always comes, which is through the recirculation path invisible thin enough that Grady Whitlock's first indication was not smoke at all, but a taste at the back of his throat like burnt pennies. He said something to Theo Nakamura, and the something came out wrong. The consonant slid. He heard it happen. He reached for his oxygen mask with a hand that had gone strange and slow. And he got the strap over the wrong ear, and he tried again, and on the second attempt, his arm stopped halfway and stayed there. Theo Nakamura was 26 years old. He had 410 hours in type. This was his 11th Pacific crossing and his first with this captain. He got his own mask on in 3 seconds. That part was pure training. That part worked exactly the way it was supposed to, and then he turned in his seat and watched a man with 31 years of experience lose the ability to speak. Grady, Grady, Captain. Whitlock's eyes were open. He was looking at Theo. He was trying very hard to say something, and nothing was coming out. Theo got the captain's mask on him. He got it on crooked and then fixed it, and he held it there with one hand while flying with the other, and he said the man's name 11 more times, and at some point in there he understood that he was alone at the controls of a wide-body airliner over the middle of the Pacific Ocean with an uncontained fire underneath him and 279 other people who had absolutely no idea he was 26. He declared the emergency himself. His voice held mostly. Oakland Oceanic came back and asked for his intentions, and he said the only word that made any sense, which was divert. And then he pulled up the nearest suitable field on the display and looked at the number next to it and felt his stomach go through the floor. 640 nautical miles, 81 minutes. The fire had been burning for 30. So, Quinn was at the forward bulkhead by then, and that was where it fell apart because that was where Nolan Ashby got involved. He had been watching her come up the aisle. He had watched her stop in the forward galley and speak to the senior flight attendant and point at the flight deck door, and he had reached a conclusion about what was happening that made perfect sense from where he was sitting in 2A. He stood up in the aisle and put his arm across it. No, no, absolutely not. He was speaking to Simone, not to Quinn. He had not addressed a single word to Quinn in 4 hours, and he did not start now. You are not opening that door. Do you understand what's happening here? I have flown this route for 11 years. I know what a security event looks like. She has been working her way forward since we left San Diego. Sir, I need you to sit down. I will not sit down. His voice was climbing. Heads were coming up all through the forward cabin. Look at her. Look at what she's wearing. You are about to open a hardened flight deck door and cruise for a woman who cannot possibly be who she says she is. And when this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, I want it on record that I told you. And then somebody in row 6 said, is that smoke? That was the moment the airplane changed. It moved through the cabin the way it always moves, not as a wave, but as a pressure drop. 268 people who had been asleep or watching a movie or thinking about their connection were suddenly all at once awake in the same room. Somebody unbuckled. Somebody else stood up. A child started to cry, and then a second one, and the sound of it did something to the adults that no announcement ever could have. Simone Adeyemi had the restraint kit out of the closet and open in her hands. She had never used one. She had checked it before every flight for 11 years and never once used it. She looked at Quinn Marlowe. Give me a reason, she said. Right now, fast. Give me something I can put in a report. And Quinn, who had a duffel bag under seat 31C with a military ID in it that would come back suspended, who was under a federal protective order that made every word she was about to say a violation, who had 72 hours until 3 officers decided whether she got to keep her career, did not hesitate. Airworthiness Directive, Deferral MDL-227 Item 4, she said. Aft Class C, Cargo Compartment, Panel MRL-9, Lot 411, manufactured by Meridian Interiors, certified under a burn-through test that was run at a flame temperature 19% below standard because the lab's calibration was out and nobody caught it. Real burn-through interval on that panel is between 9 and 11 minutes, not 20. It has been burning for 31. That means it is through the liner and into the floor beam structure right now. Same deferral item, 7 aft smoke detection loop, inoperative, authorized for continued operation for up to 120 flight hours. Same document, same page, same signature at the bottom. Nobody in that galley said anything. Check the cargo temperature readout, Quinn said. It'll be climbing again. It started climbing again about 90 seconds after the bottle discharged. If I'm making this up, it'll be steady. Simone did not check it because she did not have to. She had already seen the ceiling. But she asked the question anyway, and she asked it because she needed one thing in her hands that she could hold up afterward. Show me an ID. Quinn took it out of her pocket. Simone ran it against the crew tablet the way they'd been shown in Recurrent, and she watched the field come back and her face changed. Marlo Quinn ALT, USN status suspended administrative hold. Ashby saw it over her shoulder. He actually laughed one short, ugly bark of it, mostly relief. There it is. There it is. Suspended. She's suspended. Whatever she isn't anymore, and you were about to. Sir, Simone did not look at him. One more word, and I put you into the back. She was looking at Quinn. Quinn Marlowe stood there in the forward galley of a burning airplane and watched a 22-year-old flight attendant and an 11-year veteran and 140 pairs of eyes in the forward cabin all arrive at the same three-letter air word at the same time, and she understood with total clarity that she could not prove she was anybody. Not one thing on her body said what she was. Her ID said what she wasn't anymore. The only evidence she had was in her head, and the only way to spend it was to say it out loud, and she had already said more than would ever be forgiven. So she stopped trying to be believed and started being useful. Fine, she said. Then don't take my word for it. Ask him. She pointed at the flight deck door. Your first officer is alone in there right now. His captain is down. He's 26 years old, and he has a checklist that tells him to divert in a divert field that is 640 miles away, and he is doing the math, and he is getting an answer he doesn't want, and he has nobody to say it out loud to. He is about to spend the next 20 minutes flying toward land he cannot reach because the checklist says so, and because he's 26 and nobody has ever told him it's allowed to throw the checklist away. Open the door, put me on the interphone with him, and let him ask me anything he wants. If he tells you I'm wrong, you can restrain me, and I'll help you do it. Simone Adeyemi looked at the restraint kit in her hands. She put it down on the counter. Ina, she said, get the door. Theo Nakamura had the divert field programmed in the airplane in a turn when the interphone chimed. Han had run the numbers 4 times. He kept running them because each time he ran them, he was hoping he'd made an arithmetic error, and each time he hadn't. 81 minutes to the field. He did not have 81 minutes. He did not have 40. He had whatever the floor beams over the aft cargo compartment had, and he had no way to know what that was, and the not knowing was doing something to him that he could feel in his hands. Behind him, Grady Whitlock was breathing and not much else. Flight deck. Theo, it's Simone. I've got a passenger up here, former Navy. She's the one who called the fire before the panel did 9 minutes before Theo. She called it before we had a single indication. I need you to talk to her. He almost said no. He would admit that later to a room full of investigators without softening it. I almost said no because I was already drowning, and I did not have the capacity for one more input. Put her on. Lieutenant Marlowe, Navy. First officer, what's your name? Nakamura. Theo. Theo, say your fuel state and your time to the divert field. He said them. There was a pause on the line about 2 seconds long, and then she said the thing nobody else on that airplane was going to say to him. You're not going to make it. Theo Nakamura closed his eyes behind his mask. I know, he said, and the relief in it nearly took his head off. Somebody had said it. It was outside his skull now. It was a thing in the world that another person had also looked at, and he was not crazy, and he was not a coward, and the numbers were the numbers. How long do I actually have? I don't know, nobody knows, but I can tell you what's under you. That panel's been burning 34 minutes. The liner's gone. It's into the floor structure. And the floor structure is what your flight controls run through. So the honest answer is you have as long as those cables have. And when they go, you won't get a warning and you won't get a second chance. Every minute you spend flying toward an island you can't reach is a minute you're spending on a bet that the airplane will hold. I wouldn't take that bet. Then what do I do? His voice cracked in the middle of it, and he did not care. What do I do? There's nothing out here. There's nothing for 600 miles in any direction. There's a destroyer, Quinn said. Theo stopped. Say again. There's a surface action group running workups south of the transit lanes. I know this because I was supposed to be on one of those ships next week. They've got a destroyer with a flight deck, at least 2 helicopters, and about 300 sailors, whose entire job is exactly this. If they're where I think they are, they're inside 60 miles of your position. And if we can raise them and put this airplane in the water next to them, then this is a rescue with a response time measured in minutes instead of hours. You want me to ditch? I want you to ditch on purpose next to a warship at a time and place you choose with everybody, briefed and braced and wearing a vest, Quinn said. The alternative is that the floor lets go somewhere over open ocean at 37,000 feet, and it isn't a ditching at all. Those are the two options. There is no third one, I'm sorry. The silence on the interphone lasted long enough that Simone put a hand on the counter. Then Theo said very quietly, "Grady's not going to wake up for this, is he?" "Probably not. He's got 4 months left." "Theo," Quinn's voice did not change, but something in it got closer. "Look at your hands." He looked at his hands. "They're steady," she said. "I can hear it in your voice. Your voice is doing something you don't like, but your hands are steady, and the hands are the part that matters. You've been flying this airplane by yourself with a dead man's weight in the seat next to you for 11 minutes, and it hasn't wobbled once. That's not luck. Somebody taught you. Now do the next thing." Theo Nakamura was 26 years old. He said, "Get her up here." The flight deck door opened for Quinn Marlowe at 41 minutes. She did not sit down. There was nowhere to sit. She stood behind the center pedestal with one hand braced on the back of the captain's seat, and she looked at Grady Whitlock, whose color was wrong, whose mask was fogging in a way that meant he was still breathing, and she checked his carotid with 2 fingers, because it took her 1 second, and because she had never once in her life walked past a person without checking. "He's got a pulse, strong. He'll be a problem in about an hour and not before." Then she looked at the panel. Cargo temperature climbing, rate of climb increasing. Second bottle already fired, already spent no effect. Position a number in the middle of the ocean that meant nothing to anybody who hadn't spent 6 years learning what the ocean does with numbers like that. "Give me the guard frequency," she said. 121.5. "And Theo, start your descent now, not in 5 minutes. Get down to 10,000. Lower cabin altitude buys the people back their time and gets you into air. That's warm enough to survive. If I descend, I burn fuel faster. You don't need the fuel. You're not going anywhere." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, the t-shirt, the ponytail, the cracked watch, the 25-year-old face. And Theo Nakamura would tell an NTSB investigator 4 days later that this was the exact instant he stopped noticing any of it. "Okay," he said and pushed the nose down. Quinn keyed the mic. "Any warship, any station, any aircraft on guard. Cascadia Pacific 442. We have an uncontained cargo fire aft hold. Suppression has failed. We are 640 miles from the nearest land, and we are not going to make land. 280 souls aboard, requesting immediate ditch coordination and surface support." She said it flat. She said it the way you read a gauge. And 200 miles away in a helicopter over gray water, a Navy commander with a coffee going cold by his knee heard a voice he had last heard in a debrief room 2 years earlier and forgot how to breathe. Behind her in the cabin, Nolan Ashby was standing at the forward bulkhead where Simone had left him, and he had gone very still, and he was staring at the flight deck door. Because he had heard her say her name into the interphone, Marlowe. I knew that name. He had seen it exactly once typed at the top of a 91-page document that had crossed his desk 2 years ago, with a routing slip and a recommendation attached, and he had signed the recommendation without reading past the executive summary, and the recommendation had been to shelve it. Nolan Ashby sat down in seat 2A with his hands on his knees and understood with a clarity that would never once leave him for the rest of his life that the woman he had called a fraud 4 hours ago was the only reason he was going to see his children again, and that the fire underneath them had his signature on it. The first thing that went was her sense of direction. Quinn had been trained for that. She had taught it. She had put 400 students into a submerged cabin trainer in a blacked-out pool and told them the same sentence every time: the water will lie to you about which way is up. So don't ask the water, ask your hands. Her right hand found a seat back. Her left found a floor track. Down was where the track was. That was all she needed. 11 feet in, she found the galley cart. It had come off its lock during the second impact and slid aft and jammed itself across the galley entry, and behind it, There was a space about the size of a closet with maybe 14 inches of air trapped against the ceiling, and in that space a 6-year-old boy was making a sound that she felt through the water before she heard it. She got both hands on the cart and pulled. It didn't move. She braced her feet against the bulkhead and pulled again, with everything her legs had, and the cart shifted an inch and stopped. And her breath was 30 seconds old, and her chest had started to talk to her. She could not get through. Quinn Marlowe came up into the 14 inches of air on the other side of the cart, the only way available to her, which was to go under. It through a gap of maybe 10 inches with her arms above her head and her shoulders turned, and something on the underside of that cart opened her forearm from wrist to elbow, and she did not notice it for another 11 minutes. Her face broke the surface into a pocket of air that smelled like fuel and burnt plastic. Milo was 6 inches from her chin, up both hands flat against the ceiling panel. "Hey," Quinn said. "Hey, Milo, look at me." He looked at her. His eyes were enormous and entirely calm, in the way that small children go calm when they have run all the way through fear and out the other side, and that scared her more than anything that had happened in the last 90 minutes. "I'm Quinn. Ray sent me." Ray let go. "No, baby. The water took you off him. He didn't let go." She got one arm around him and felt how cold he already was, which was the actual clock, not the air. "Milo, I need you to do one thing, and it's a hard thing. We have to go under the water for about 6 seconds to get out." "I can't." "You can. I've watched 100 people your size do it." "I can't. The water's black." "Then don't look." Quinn put her hand over his eyes, and she felt him grab her wrist with both hands and hang on. "Close your eyes and hold your breath and hold on to my arm and count to 6. Can you count to 6? "Yes." "Out loud, right now, show me." 1, 2, 3. "Perfect. That's exactly how fast. Big breath." He took it. She felt his ribs go out under her arm. Then Quinn Marlowe went under with a 6-year-old boy clamped to her forearm, and she swam 11 feet through a flooded galley in absolute darkness, with one hand tracking a floor rail, and at 4 seconds Milo started to fight her, and at 5 seconds he got a hand free and hit her in the side of the head, and she did not let go, and she did not stop. At 7 seconds, she came out through a doorway that was fully underwater. At 11, her head broke the surface of the Pacific Ocean, and she got him up onto her chest and pulled the toggle on his vest with her teeth, because her right hand was full of a child's shirt, and her left had stopped working properly for reasons she hadn't examined. Milo coughed once, then vomited seawater, then started to scream, and the sound of a 6-year-old screaming carried across 400 feet of open water to 279 people who had just spent 9 minutes believing he was dead. Somebody in Raft 2 started to sob. Ray Delgado went into the water without a word and swam to her. Tim. The count came back at 280, and then it came back at 279, and then nobody could make it stop moving. That was the part nobody talks about. Everyone remembers the water landing. Nobody remembers the 40 minutes afterward when a soaked manifest fell apart in Simone Adeyemi's hands, and she had to do the whole thing again, from memory raft by raft, shouting names across open water, while the helicopters worked overhead and the destroyer Cheyenne came up on them like a wall. Quinn was in Raft 3. She had been trying to get out of Raft 3 for 4 minutes. "Sit down," said the rescue swimmer, who had dropped in beside her, a kid named Petty Officer Vance, 23 years old, who had absolutely no idea who she was. Ma'am, you've got a laceration to the forearm that is not okay, and I need a count." They're doing the count. They're doing a count. They're doing it off a wet manifest with 280 names on it, and half of them are children who were sitting in laps and never got a boarding pass. Quinn's voice had gone somewhere very flat. "Give me your radio." "Ma'am, give me your radio, Petty Officer." He gave her the radio. On board Cheyenne 11 minutes later, Commander Elias Rourke came down from the flight deck and found her standing at the rail in a soaked olive t-shirt, with a pressure dressing taped down her left forearm and a borrowed pair of binoculars in her hands, refusing to go below. 279. They had 279. The one they didn't have was a 54-year-old man named Dennis O'Yelleron, who had gone out door 4 and been separated in the first minute, and nobody had seen him since. And one of the helicopters had already made 2 passes over the debris field. A hospital corpsman had tried 3 times to get Quinn below to the wardroom. A chief had tried twice. Somebody had put a rescue blanket around her shoulders, and she had taken it off and handed it to a shivering flight attendant without breaking her scan. Rourke stood next to her at the rail and said nothing for a while. Then you look like hell undertow. 279. I know. Your bird's flying the wrong pattern. They're running the drift model off the impact point. He didn't go in at the impact point. He went out door 4 minutes later, in a mile down range with a surface current running about a knot and a half northeast. Rourke looked at her. You've been tracking the current. Since I got in the water, he got on the radio. 19 minutes after that, Petty Officer Vance's helicopter picked up a 54-year-old man clinging to a floating wing panel, a mile and a half northeast of everything hypothermic, semi-conscious, and alive. The call came over the ship's net. Cheyenne Rescue 2-1, we have him. One survivor male recovered. That's your 280. Quinn Marlowe lowered the binoculars. Then she sat down on the deck of a United States Navy destroyer, with her back against the rail, and she did not get up for 11 minutes, and nobody made her. Elias Rourke sat down next to her. He did it without ceremony, a commander in a flight suit on a wet deck, and neither of them said anything for a long time. 2 years ago, you sat like that in a debrief room, he said finally. I remember. You wouldn't take a blanket then either. Quinn looked out at the water. The number didn't match that night, she said. No, it matched today. Rourke nodded slowly. It matched today. The rafts came aboard at sunset, hoisted up one at a time, and that was when the story stopped being a rescue and started being something else. A boatswain's mate was securing the raft 3 when he noticed the inflation assembly hanging open where Quinn had torn the housing apart with her hands. And he called over a chief, and the chief called over the ship's supply officer, and the supply officer photographed the data plate because that was procedure. Then he read what was stamped on it. Then he read it again and went and found Commander Rourke and said, Sir, I think you need to look at this. The serial number on that inflation assembly belonged to a lot that had been certified destroyed 22 months earlier. There was a document in a federal database that said every unit in that lot had been rendered unserviceable and disposed of. There was a signature on that document. The Pacific Ocean had just handed back the evidence that was supposed to no longer exist. Rourke stood on the flight deck of his ship, holding a photograph on a phone screen, and understood several hours before anybody in Washington did that. A 25-year-old lieutenant who was scheduled to be fired on Thursday had just been proven right by 70 tons of seawater. He found Quinn in the wardroom wrapped in dry coveralls 3 sizes too big eating soup because a corpsman had physically put it in front of her. He showed her the photograph. Quinn looked at the serial number for a long moment. Then she set down the spoon in her hand, which had not shaken once in the water. Not once, not through 11 feet of black. Galley with a child on her arm started to shake so badly she had to put it under the table. That's the lot, she said. That's the lot. That's the lot that killed Roz. Yeah, Rourke said. It is. Priya Raghavan of the National Transportation Safety Board reached the Cheyenne by helicopter at 10:40 the next morning, and she found her key witness sitting on a mess deck bench with her arm in a sling, being aggressively fed a second breakfast by 2 culinary specialists who had decided she was theirs now. Raghavan had been doing this for 19 years. She had a very specific manner, no warmth, no coldness, just a total and slightly unnerving attention. Lieutenant Marlowe, I need a statement. I know. I want to be clear about something before we start because I've read the preliminary and I've made a phone call. Raghavan sat down across from her. You're subject to a protective order. Judge signed 22 months old prohibiting disclosure of the contents of a report you authored. Everything you said in that cabin yesterday and everything you're about to say to me is a violation of it. I know that too. Your board convenes in Hawaii in 51 hours. 51 hours in about 20 minutes, Raghavan studied her. You understand that if you give me this statement, you are almost certainly ending your career. Not maybe. There's a board that already wanted you gone, and you're about to hand them a documented, witness-recorded violation with 280 witnesses. Quinn Marlowe looked at her. And this was the thing that Priya Raghavan would repeat verbatim at 3 separate hearings over the following year. Because in 19 years of investigations, she had never heard anybody say anything like it. Ma'am, there is a man on this ship who spent the night in a rack 40 feet from here because a raft inflated, Quinn said. It inflated because I got my hands on it. 2 years ago, I had my hands on the same assembly, the same lot in the dark, and I wasn't fast enough. And a woman I loved drowned 4 feet away from me, holding on to the other side of it. I wrote 91 pages so that nobody would ever have to do that again, and somebody put it in a drawer and then investigated me for a leak I didn't do. So I want you to write down every word I'm about to tell you. And then at the bottom, I want you to write down that I was ordered not to say it and that I said it anyway, and that I understood exactly what it would cost when I opened my mouth. Raghavan did not move for a second. Then she took the cap off her pen. "Start at the boarding gate," she said. The statement took 5 hours and 11 minutes. The airline's first press release went out at 6:14 that evening Eastern Time, and it was a masterpiece of a certain kind of writing. It praised the professionalism of the flight crew. It named First Officer Theo Nakamura as having executed a controlled water landing under extraordinary circumstances. It thanked the United States Navy. It expressed profound gratitude for the actions of the cabin crew. It did not contain the name Quinn Marlowe anywhere. Theo Nakamura read it on a phone somebody had lent him sitting in a room at a naval medical facility on Oahu with a blanket around his shoulders and his hands still doing a thing he couldn't stop them doing. Then he walked out into a corridor where a corporate communications director was standing with two lawyers and he said, "Where's the press?" "Theo, we're going to handle all of that. You've been through Where's the Press?" They put him in front of a camera an hour later because they could not physically stop him from finding one, and they briefed him for 11 minutes on the way, and Theo Nakamura stood up in a borrowed jacket in front of 9 microphones and threw every word of it away. "My name is Theo Nakamura. I was the first officer on Cascadia 442. His voice was absolutely wrecked. "I want to say one thing and then I'll take questions. I was flying that airplane. I had my hands on the controls. But I was not commanding that aircraft. The person commanding that aircraft was a passenger in seat 31C named Lieutenant Quinn Marlowe, United States Navy. She identified a cargo fire 9 minutes before our detection system did, and our detection system never did because it was deferred. She told me I wasn't going to make land while I was still flying toward land. She found us a warship, and 90 seconds before we hit the water, she told me to disregard the ditching checklist and turn 30 degrees off the wind, and if I had not done exactly what she said, everybody forward of row 20 would be dead right now, including me." A reporter started to ask something. He kept going. "I've read the company statement. It says, I executed a controlled water landing. I want that corrected on the record by me. I executed her instructions. There is a difference, and I'm not going to let anybody blur it because 280 people came home, and it was not because of me." He looked directly into the lens. "And she's suspended. She was suspended the whole time she was doing it. Somebody should probably look into that." The clip was on every network within 40 minutes. Simone Adeyemi came to find Quinn the next morning at a hotel near Pearl Harbor, where the airline had put the crew. She had rehearsed something on the drive over. She abandoned all of it in the doorway. "I had the restraints out," Simone said. "I had them open in my hands, and I was 10 seconds from putting you in a jump seat. I want to say that out loud to your face instead of letting it sit in me for the next 30 years. You did your job. Don't do that." Simone's voice cracked. "Don't be gracious about it. I looked at you and I saw a kid in a t-shirt and I ran your ID, and when it came back suspended, I felt relieved, Quinn. For about half a second, I felt relieved because it meant I got to be right. That's the part I can't put down." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "You put the restraints on the counter," she said. "That's not enough." "It was enough. It was exactly enough. Everything that happened after that happened because you put them down." Quinn met her eyes. "You want me to tell you that you were wrong at the start?" You are. So was I about you. I looked at you and thought, company voice, she's going to fight me for 11 minutes, and you fought me for 90 seconds, and then you handed me a PA. Nobody in that galley behaved perfectly. 280 people are alive anyway. That's what a crew is." Simone Adeyemi cried for the first time in 11 years of flying standing in a hotel doorway, and Quinn let her. Ines Duarte came in behind her 20 minutes later, hovered, and finally blurted the things she had come to say. "How do I get into water survival training?" Quinn looked at her. "You already did it," she said. "You stood in a flooding doorway and said the same 4 sentences 190 times to strangers who were screaming at you. That's the whole job. Everything else is just paperwork and cold pools. I forgot which doors had rafts. When you asked me, I completely blanked. And then you didn't blank again for 90 minutes. That's not Eins. Quinn leaned forward. I have taught 400 people. About 11 of them had what you have. It is not the not blanking. Everybody blanks. It's what you did in the 4 seconds after. That afternoon, she found a voicemail on a phone the Navy had returned to her in a plastic bag. It had been sitting in her inbox for 2 years, and she had never once opened it because it was dated the day before Point Loma. And because for 2 years, the idea of hearing that voice had been a door she could not make herself walk through. She sat on the edge of a hotel bed with her arm in a sling and pressed play. Rosalind Ibarra, 38 years old, 4 months from her 20, complaining about paperwork. Marlo, where are you? I've got 41 qual sheets, and you signed 11 of them wrong, which is a personal record even for you. I'm not fixing them. I'm going to sit here and hold them hostage until you come do it yourself, and then we're going to go get bad tacos, and I'm going to explain to you for the fourth time why you're too hard on the slow ones. A pause, some noise. Then offhand already, half turned away from the phone, the way people say the most important thing they will ever say to you. Hey, seriously, you know what you're good at. You're the one who counts everybody, every time. In and out, you're a maniac about it, and the students think you're crazy. Don't ever stop doing that, kid. That's not a quirk. That's the whole job. Click. Quinn Marlowe sat on the edge of that bed and did not move for a very long time. Then she took the cracked watch off her wrist and held it in her palm. Verse 17, 2 years stopped, and she said out loud to an empty hotel room. 280 Chief, in and out, all of them. Charm. Nolan Ashby found her at the hotel that evening. He looked terrible. He had been discharged from a hospital 8 hours earlier with mild hypothermia and a lawyer already on a plane, and he stood in the corridor holding a folder like it was heavy. Lieutenant, 5 minutes. Quinn looked at him. You had $100,000 out of your mouth before you'd been in that cabin 10 minutes. He flinched. He took it. I know, I'm not going to explain it. There isn't an explanation, there's just what I did. He held out the folder. I want to make you an offer. My company will settle. Full civil settlement structured more money than you will earn in 4 careers in a public statement acknowledging the panel's certification irregularity. Complete admission on the technical side. And you don't testify at the airworthiness hearing. You accept a confidentiality provision and you don't testify. Quinn Marlowe looked at the folder for about 2 seconds. Mr. Ashby, do you know why I came back through the doorway of that raft? No. Because your name was on the manifest, and the manifest is the count. She did not raise her voice. I didn't pull you out of the water because I forgave you. I pulled you out because I count everybody, and it doesn't matter to me at all whether the person in my hands deserves it. That's the entire point of the job. You don't get to decide who. She handed the folder back without opening it. But I'm going to tell you what you are going to get. You're going to get me under oath in a federal hearing room, describing exactly how that liner burned and exactly how that raft failed twice 2 years apart with your signature on both deferrals. You're going to sit through all of it, and you're going to live the rest of your life knowing that the woman who saved you is the woman you called a fraud 4 hours earlier because of a t-shirt. Ashby's hands had started to shake. There were 411 panels in that lot, he said. I signed the deferral in 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Lieutenant. I remember it. It was a Tuesday. I had a call at 4, and I signed it in 6 minutes. Yes, Quinn said. That's how it always happens. She started to close the door. They're going to destroy you on Thursday, Ashby said. You understand that you broke the order. On tape, in front of 280 people. My lawyers say there's no version where you walk out of that room still in uniform. Quinn Marlowe paused in the doorway. I'll see you at the hearing, Mr. Ashby. 51 hours after she went into the water, she walked into a windowless room at Pearl Harbor where 3 officers were waiting to end her career. She was wearing an olive drab t-shirt and a pair of camouflage trousers because her service uniform was at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in a canvas duffel under seat 31C. She had her arm in a sling. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail that had gone wavy from being wet and dried in a hurry. She had a cracked dive watch on her left wrist stopped at 4:17, and she looked to every person in that room exactly like nobody at all. The board president was a captain named Doreen Vasquez, and she had been handed this case 11 months ago as an administrative matter. A leak investigation, a disgruntled junior officer, a tidy piece of paperwork that would take 2 hours and produce a separation letter. She had spent the last 36 hours reading things she had not been given 11 months ago. She looked up as Quinn came in. "Lieutenant Marlowe, you're out of uniform." "Yes, ma'am. My uniform's in 600 feet of water, about 400 miles northeast of here." Somebody in the second row made a sound they tried to turn into a cough. Vasquez looked at the t-shirt, the sling, the ponytail. She had seen the footage. Everyone in that room had seen the footage, a phone video shot from raft 240 seconds long, in which a small figure in an olive t-shirt goes over the side of a raft and disappears into a half-sunken fuselage and comes back out 11 seconds later with a screaming child on her chest. 11 million people had seen it by Thursday morning. "Sit down," Vasquez said. "This board has been reconstituted. You'll notice 2 of the original members are no longer sitting." Quinn noticed. The room was full. That was the thing nobody had prepared her for. 11 months of this had been a private humiliation conducted in corridors and email chains, and now there were 40 people in folding chairs behind her, and she did not turn around to look, and she could hear them anyway. Theo Nakamura was in the third row. He had flown in on his own money against direct advice from 3 lawyers. Simone Adeyemi was next to him. Ines Duarte was next to her in a flight attendant's uniform she had not been cleared to wear yet because she had put it on anyway. Elias Rourke was standing at the back because there were no seats left and he had refused one twice. Lieutenant Vasquez said, "This proceeding was convened to determine whether you unlawfully disclosed a protected technical report. That question is still live. I want to be extremely clear that what happened on Cascadia 442 does not vacate it. Heroism is not a defense to a disclosure violation. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because I'd rather you hear it from me than find out at the end." They called Nolan Ashby first. He came in with 2 attorneys and a folder of his own, and a face like a man who had been awake for 4 days, which he had. He was there under subpoena from a parallel airworthiness proceeding, and his testimony had been coordinated to within an inch of its life. For 11 minutes, it worked. He described a good faith deferral process. He described industry's standard reliance on certified test data. He described a supplier chain with multiple layers of oversight. He used the phrase "within the applicable regulatory framework" 4 times. He was calm and specific, and he never once looked at Quinn, and by the 8th minute the room had started to believe him, because he was very good at this, and he had been doing it for 20 years. Then a board member, a lieutenant commander named Estrada, who was 34 and an engineer by training, and who had spent the previous night reading a 91-page report, cover to cover, asked one question. "Mr. Ashby, you've testified that your office approved the MRL-9 deferral in reliance on the burn-through certification of record." "That's correct. The certification of record is dated the 19th of March, if that's what the document says. Your approval signature is dated the 11th of March. The room did not react because most of it had not yet done the arithmetic. Ashby did. Quinn watched it happen from 12 feet away. She watched a man's entire architecture come apart behind his eyes, while his face stayed completely still. And it took about a second and a half. "I'd have to check the file," he said. "I'm looking at the file. You approved continued operation on a panel 8 days before the test that certified it was run." Estrada's voice was almost gentle. "You couldn't have relied on that data, sir. It didn't exist yet." Ashby's attorney leaned in and said something. "I'd like to consult with counsel," Ashby said. "Take your time." He took 4 minutes. He came back, and he did not look at his lawyers when he sat down, and everyone in that room understood that whatever had been said in that hallway, he had lost the argument. "The certification was pending," he said. "We were told it would clear. It was a scheduling formality. It always clears." "It didn't clear, Mr. Ashby. It failed. It was rerun 3 weeks later at a different lab with corrected calibration, and it failed by a factor of 2. And that result was filed as a supplement, and the supplement was never routed for review." "I didn't see the supplement." "No, sir." Estrada set the paper down. "One person saw the supplement. She wrote 91 pages about it, and she's sitting behind you." They called Quinn after the recess. She had been told by 3 separate people what to do. Her assigned counsel had told her to be contrite. Rourke had told her to say as little as possible. A public affairs officer had told her with a straight face that the Navy would prefer she emphasize teamwork. Vasquez said, "Lieutenant, the board is prepared to hear your statement. Take whatever time you need." Quinn stood up. She did not talk about herself. "Ma'am, I have one request and then 5 names." Vasquez blinked. "Go ahead." "I'm requesting an immediate fleet-wide grounding advisory. Every aircraft, military and commercial, carrying an MRL-9 series cargo liner from lots 409 through 414, and every life raft with an inflation assembly from the Fenwick Delacroix lot that was certified destroyed in March of 2 years ago and demonstrably was not, because I had my hands on one of them 96 hours ago and it did not work. Lieutenant, this board does not have the authority to—" "I know it doesn't, ma'am, but somebody in this room does, and everything I say for the rest of my life will be less useful than saying that sentence in front of a transcript." Vasquez looked at her for a long moment. "Continue." "The panels are on 411 aircraft. The rafts are on more than that because they got redistributed as spares after the recall that never happened. Grounding them will cost the industry somewhere north of $1 billion, and it will strand a very large number of people in airports, and everyone in this room is going to hear about it for a year." She paused. "I'd like the record to reflect that the alternative also costs something." Then she read the names. Senior Chief Petty Officer Rosalind Ibarra, Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Hale, Petty Officer 3rd Class Damian Cruz Reyes, Seaman Apprentice Bethany Cole, Civilian Instructor Arthur Pham. She said them slowly. She did not have notes. 2 of them died of burns. 3 of them died in the water holding on to the outside of a 20-person raft waiting for it to inflate. It never inflated. It was the same lot. It was the same failure. The interval between their deaths and the failure that happened 4 days ago is 22 months. And in those 22 months, the corrective action taken by anyone was 0. The room was completely silent. 96 hours ago, I was in the water again, with my hands on the same assembly. This time it came up. I want to be honest with this board about why it was not skill. It was that I had done it once before and I already knew where the housing was in the dark. That's the only difference between 4 days ago and 2 years ago. That's it. That's the whole margin. Quinn Marlowe looked at the 3 officers in front of her. "I violated the protective order. I want to say that plainly on the record, because I've spent 2 years being accused of something I didn't do, and I'm not going to spend 1 minute lying about something I did. I broke it in a galley in front of a senior flight attendant, deliberately 4 days ago, and I broke it again for 5 hours with an NTSB investigator, and I will break it again in every federal proceeding that asks me to. I'm not sorry. If you offered me my career back on the condition that I hadn't said it, I'd say it again on the way out the door." She sat down. Nobody in the room said anything for 11 seconds. The board deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Quinn spent it in a corridor with Theo Nakamura, who had brought her a coffee she didn't want and was talking too fast about nothing because he had figured out that the alternative was silence. "They're taking a long time. Long is good, right? Long means arguing. Long means paperwork. You're not even nervous." Quinn looked at him. "I'm sitting in a hallway waiting for 3 people to tell me what I am," she said. 4 days ago, I was in a galley with 11 seconds of air, deciding whether a 6-year-old was going to fight me. That was easier." Thea went quiet for a second. "Can I say something dumb? Always. I've thought about it about 900 times, the turn, 30 degrees off the wind. His hands were doing the thing again, the thing they'd been doing since the water. Every instructor I ever had would have told me to land into the wind. Every manual, every check ride. And I threw all of it away because a woman in a t-shirt told me to, and I still don't know why I believed you. Because I gave you the arithmetic instead of the answer." "No." He shook his head. "It wasn't that. You said, look at your hands. Nobody had ever—" I was 26 years old and alone with a dead man in the seat next to me, and you told me my hands were steady." He looked at the floor. "I'm going to be flying for 30 years. And every single time it gets bad, that's what I'm going to hear." Simone Adeyemi came down the corridor. "They're back." The findings took 4 minutes to read, and Quinn heard about 6 words of them. Charge 1, unauthorized disclosure to media outlets not substantiated. The forensic review the board had ordered in a hurry on Tuesday had traced the Trade Publication League to a contract paralegal in an entirely different office who had sold it for $11,000. 11 months. A career. 2 years of her life. $11,000. Quinn did not react at all. Behind her, Elias Rourke said a word that got him a look from a chief. Charge 2, Vasquez read. Violation of a lawfully issued protective order on or about the 14th aboard Cascadia Pacific Flight 442 and thereafter. She looked up. Substantiated. By the respondent's own testimony and admission. The room made a sound. This board finds the violation established and imposes a punitive letter of censure to be entered permanently in the officer's service record. Somebody behind Quinn actually stood up. She heard the chair. Sit down, Vasquez said without heat, and they sat down. Then the captain put the paper aside. Lieutenant Marlowe, I'm going to say something now that is not part of the findings, and the reporter will record it anyway. I have sat on 11 of these. I have never once been in a position where the correct legal outcome and the correct human outcome pointed in opposite directions this violently. You broke the order. You have admitted it 3 separate times in this room on the record, with counsel present, in a manner I can only describe as aggressively unhelpful to yourself. Yes, ma'am. You are entitled to appeal. Given the circumstances, given the 280, given what this board now knows about the underlying report, I will tell you candidly that an appeal has an excellent chance. Quinn stood up. I decline the appeal, ma'am. Vasquez went very still. Say that again for the record, Lieutenant. I decline to appeal the censure. Quinn's voice carried to the back of the room. Ma'am, if I appeal it and I win, then the record shows that an officer broke a lawful order and got away with it because the outcome happened to be good. And the next lieutenant who thinks about doing something like this will be looking at my case, and what they'll learn from it is that it's fine as long as you win. It isn't fine. I broke it because I decided 280 people were worth more than my career, and if that decision was real, then I have to actually pay for it. Otherwise, it was never a decision. It was just a bet. I can live with a letter in my file, ma'am. I could not have lived with the other thing. Captain Doreen Vasquez looked at a 25-year-old lieutenant in a T-shirt with her arm in a sling. Board is adjourned, she said, and her voice was not entirely steady, and every person in that room heard it. The offers started before she was out of the parking lot. 3 airlines, 2 of whom wanted her in a safety officer role and 1 of whom wanted her in commercials. A defense contractor with a number attached that made her assigned counsel physically sit down. A documentary company, a literary agent who had somehow gotten her personal number and opened with the phrase, let's talk about the movie. 2 morning shows, a network that offered to fly her mother in, a senator's office. Quinn Marlowe said no to all of it in writing in about 90 minutes using the same 4-sentence template. Then she called a number in Pensacola and asked whether the Aviation Survival Training Center still had an unfilled lead instructor billet, and the master chief on the other end said, Ma'am, we have had that billet unfilled for 9 months, and I have been told twice this week not to fill it until somebody called. Who told you that? A commander named Rourke, ma'am. He was extremely rude about it. The grounding advisory went out 11 days later. 411 aircraft. Then when the raft assemblies got traced properly, 906. Cancellations across 3 continents. A trade association issued a statement calling it disproportionate. A cable news panel spent 40 minutes arguing about whether one incident justified the disruption. On day 19, a maintenance crew in Frankfurt pulled a raft canister off a wide body and cut it open on the hangar floor, and the inflation assembly inside was from the destroyed and not destroyed lot, and it did not function on the bench test, and there were photographs. The arguing stopped. By the end of the year, 41 MRL-9 panels had been pulled with documented burn-through failures, and 2,200 inflation assemblies had been removed from service and physically destroyed, this time with video. Nobody ever calculated how many people that saved, because that is not a number anybody can calculate. It doesn't have faces. It doesn't have a manifest. It's just an absence, a set of mornings that stayed ordinary for people who will never know how close they came and who are right now doing something forgettable. That's the part of the job nobody ever thanks anyone for. Quinn had never needed thanking. She had only ever needed the count. See? Nolan Ashby plowed out 14 months later. Not to anything dramatic. There is no federal statute for signing something in 6 minutes on a Tuesday. He pled to falsification of a required maintenance record and obstruction of an FAA proceeding, and he got 26 months in the civil settlement to the families of the 5 who died at Point Loma, was large enough that it stopped being a number and became a fact. He wrote Quinn a letter from the facility, 4 pages. She read the first page and then she read the last paragraph. And the last paragraph said, "I have thought about it every day, and I still cannot tell you why I said the thing about the costume. I didn't know you. You were nobody to me." That's the answer, and it's worse than any other answer would have been. Quinn did not write back. She put the letter in a drawer. She kept it, though. She never quite knew why. The watch went to a jeweler in Pensacola, an old man who took 20 minutes to look at it and then said, "This has been in salt water more than once. Twice. You want the crystal replaced?" "I want it running." He turned it over in his hands. "The crack's structural. I can replace the crystal, but I can't save the crack. You'd lose it." Quinn thought about that for a while. "Keep the crack," she said. "I just want the hands to move." It cost her $400 in 11 days, and when she got it back, the crack ran diagonally across the crystal, exactly the way it always had, and underneath it, the second hand was going around. She wore it every day after that. Nobody who saw it ever knew what it was. That was fine. That had always been the point. So, 4 months after the water, at 6 in the morning, 20 students stood on the deck of a training pool in Pensacola. They were mostly 19 and 20. They were cold and they were nervous, and about half of them were already privately certain they were going to fail, which was normal and which was in Quinn's experience roughly 0% predictive of anything. 2 of them did not belong there in the usual way. Theo Nakamura, 26 first officer, had taken 3 weeks of unpaid leave to attend a course he did not need, would not be credentialed for, and had had to write 2 letters to get permission to audit. He had not explained himself to anyone at his airline and had not intended to. Inez Duarte, 22, had applied through a civilian pathway, been rejected once, for an administrative reason appealed. It'd been rejected again and then shown up in person at the schoolhouse with a folder and refused to leave. And somewhere in that process, a master chief had made a phone call and said, "There's a kid out here who won't go away." And Quinn had said, "Let her in." Quinn Marlowe walked out onto the deck in a rash guard and shorts with a whistle around her neck and a permanent letter of censure in her service record, and the worst-kept quiet reputation in the United States Navy. The students went silent because they knew. Of course they knew. There is no such thing as anonymity in a schoolhouse. She let it sit for exactly 3 seconds. "Everybody in front of me is here because you want to be the person who goes in the water when it's bad," she said. "Good. In 4 weeks, I'll know which of you can. I want to tell you the one thing on day 1 because if you don't have this, none of the rest of it matters. It's not strength. Some of you are strong and some of you aren't. And it's the 4th or 5th most important thing. It's not breath hold. I'll teach you that. It's a skill. It's boring. You'll get it. It's not equipment. Equipment fails. Equipment lies. Equipment has a serial number and a certification and a signature on a piece of paper. And one day the equipment you were promised is going to do nothing at all in your hands, in the dark, with people screaming 40 feet away." She let that one sit longer. "Here's the job. You count everybody before you go in, out loud. Every time, even when it's stupid, even when it's 4 people in a pool, even when the other instructors think you're a maniac about it. And you count everybody when you come out. And if the numbers don't match, you don't leave. That's it. That's the entire job. Everything else in this course is just details about how." Somebody in the second row raised a hand. "Ma'am, what if you can't? What if the number doesn't match and there's nothing you can do?" Quinn Marlowe looked at the kid for a moment. "Then you go back in anyway," she said, "and you find out." She stepped up onto the platform. "Count off, out loud, starting on my left." And behind her, 20 voices began at once. She went into the water. The numbers matched.